On the day of our 50th wedding anniversary, my husband took his mistress, Celeste Monroe, the so-called first love, to choose a burial plot. He's never been able to forget that they posted a picture of themselves on the cemetery lawn, standing in front of a headstone carved with a shared epitaph. I allowed him to purchase a grave with his mistress, but I knew he would soon regret it. It was posted on social media with the same caption on both accounts: "We couldn't share a bed in life, but we share a grave in death." The picture showed two lovers smiling together after being apart for a lifetime, and it was a perfect example of bittersweet romance. The comments section was full of admiration and sentiment, but love ultimately triumphed. In the end, the old professor was reunited with his true love, even my son. My heart twisted when I read Julian's words, "Dad, I'll make sure your wish comes true someday. You and Celeste deserve it." I tapped like that, then I quietly made my way back to the dining room and started to clear away the anniversary dinner. I had spent the entire day preparing the meal, putting each dish in the trash. When the garbage bag was full, I went downstairs and fed the stray. I had just scraped the entire dinner into a garbage bag with the intention of feeding the strays around the neighborhood. Later, the dishes were still on the counter untouched when the front door suddenly swung open. Richard returned, and I was caught. The air still smelled faintly of roasted meat and warm spices, but all I could feel was the hollow ache of disappointment after 50 years of marriage. I had assumed that he would be somewhere with Celeste, clinking champagne glasses and watching the sunset, but he looked away awkwardly and said in that half-hearted tone, "Celeste thought you might be upset and asked me to come back and comfort you." My lips twitched, but I didn't say a word. "So it wasn't you made all of this for yourself and threw it away? It must be nice living such a wasteful life. Have you completely forgotten how to be frugal?" That familiar tone condescending? He remembered. What today was not because guilt finally caught up with him. It was just another thoughtful gesture from Celeste. He entered the kitchen, his eyes scanning the empty table and the trash bag full of food, and his face darkened instantly. It hit me like a reflex, cold like a professor reprimanding a stupid student from his podium. He has always spoken to me in that manner for 50 years, giving lectures without ever questioning why or how, but strangely, he is never that way with anyone else. He is always kind, gentle, and courteous, especially with Celeste. For a long time, I told myself that it was because he felt more at ease and closer to me, but today if it had been the old me, I might have tried to explain that the dinner wasn't just for me and that I cooked it for the entire family because today marked 50 years of marriage, which is meant to symbolize something golden. However, it finally hit me that it wasn't intimacy but indifference. You don't speak that way to someone you love, you criticize what you no longer care for and raise your voice at what you've already given up on. For a whole month, I planned the menu in the hopes that we would all be gathered around the table. This one time, however, I had been out since the morning shopping and preparing everyone's favorite dishes, and for no reason, nobody arrived, not even a phone call. For a brief moment, I even let myself think that they might be planning a surprise, but all I received was a picture on social media with a heartfelt caption that said they would never part from each other again. The explanations I had prepared dissolved on my tongue, my voice came out cold, and even though I bought the groceries and prepared the food, what I do with it is my business, not yours. Richard scowled, his face sharpening instantly. "So you are having a fit, and we are discussing being buried together after we die rather than living together. Why are you being so petty now? I've been with you for 50 years, doesn't that make it yours?" I felt like I was the one being unreasonable, and for a moment I wondered if I was being overly sensitive, but then I remembered that Celeste waited for me her entire life and never once complained. All she's asking for is a symbolic gesture after death. Is it really that difficult for you to accept the way he said it, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world? She is a so-called lover who kept getting involved in other people's marriages, and you have the audacity to call me narrow-minded. His expression instantly became stormy, and the tension between us was thick. What exactly have I done wrong in this marriage? How did I become the one who needed to reflect? I looked him in the eye, and my voice was calm, but every word was a slap across the face. Don't you dare use such obscene language to insult Celeste. Our relationship has always been innocent. He paused, then spoke again sharply. This time, she only asked me to return because she was afraid you would have an emotional breakdown. Honestly, given how resentful you've become, her kindness was completely wasted, and you no longer even know what basic decency looks like. With that, he snarled, grabbed the door handle, and snapped, "You can sit here and think about yourself. I won't be coming back for a few days." The door slammed behind him, and the only sound resonating through the apartment was my own breathing. Richard never returned, and days went by without him ever setting foot in the house, but I knew exactly where he was because Celeste's social media had turned into Athos's true love, a bond untouchable by time. Not a single comment mentioned me, the legal wife of 50 years, or what I was doing during those days. I wasn't idolized. Instead, it was a daily calendar of their love story, with sunrise by the ocean, sunset at the top of the mountain, and a heart-shaped padlock fastened to the lover's bridge. Every photo showed them pressed close together, smiling like newlyweds. When I brought up the subject of divorce in casual conversations with friends, they looked at me as if I had gone insane. They said, "Evelyn, you're over 70 and divorced. No, you've tolerated this for most of your life, can't you just keep tolerating it a little longer?" As if women my age had no right to choose a different life, as if our only purpose in life is to endure. Even Julian came by, giving me advice. He claimed to be visiting, but it felt more like a tribunal the moment he entered, and his face was filled with impatience. He sent Leo to the backyard before getting started, saying, "Mom, I really don't understand what you're doing. Dad and Celeste haven't done anything inappropriate, they're just old friends. Do you have to make such a big deal out of this? Can't you be more understanding? Be mature and remember that you wouldn't have married your father in the first place if Celeste hadn't stepped aside. She gave you this life, and you should be thankful for it. You've been fine for years, and now you want to divorce him over a grave plot? That's absurd." He paused for a second, then added, as if he were trying to sound reasonable, "Look, they just want some symbolic closure. They miss there it's not very understandable that they're now only looking for solace in death. If you proceed with this divorce, how do you think it will affect Dad's reputation? He's a renowned university professor, how would that look? Even if you don't care about him, consider me." "All right, Mom." The more he talked, the colder my heart grew. I raised this son on my own, and he seemed to care only about appearances and his legacy reputation. Sadly, he hadn't forgotten that I had put up with things for him before I almost died giving birth to him, and the day after he was born, I saw Richard and Celeste crying in each other's arms in the hospital hallway. Celeste had recently finalized her divorce and had come to Richard for solace. She knew I had just given birth, but she still wrapped herself around him without hesitation. Richard began visiting her frequently, leaving me alone in the hospital and hardly speaking to me. I was furious because Julian was only a month old when I first brought up the divorce, but both my mother and Richard's mother said the same thing: for the child's sake, just endure it. I bit back my pride as I looked down at the small bundle in my arms. As Julian grew, I stayed. There were many occasions when I wanted to leave, but Richard and Celeste kept blurring the boundaries between being friends and something more. And Julian kept pleading with me to stay. "Mom, please don't get divorced. I don't want to be the child of a broken family," and I repeatedly gave in. Decades of patience sacrificed silence for Julian, and now the son I never asked, the boy I gave my life to stand by my side, but he, of all people, shouldn't have been the one to hurt me the most this time. I looked at him, my voice steady, each word cutting through the air like a blade. "Who decided that since I put up with it for the majority of my life, I must continue to put up with it until I die? You said it yourself, so tell me how many years I have left, and why shouldn't I? I can't believe how self-centered you've become. If you want a divorce, fine, then don't ever consider me your son again." Julian's face hardened so much like his father's that it almost startled me. In that moment, I felt the last thread holding me down quietly snap, and oddly, it felt like freedom. Julian meant what he said after that last threat, but he cut off all contact. Sylvie Hartley, a young woman in her 20s who works as a ceramic artist and a part-time lawyer, was the last person I found who actually listened. When I spoke to her, she didn't give me the typical look of incredulity. Instead, her eyes were filled with admiration. "Evelyn, I genuinely admire you so much. People often say that women your age shouldn't stir up trouble anymore, but I believe it is never too late to leave the wrong person." She told me about her grandmother, a woman who lived her entire life in a loveless marriage without ever experiencing the freedom she was due. "If my grandmother had had half your courage," Sylvie said, smiling softly, "her life would have been very different." She also promised to help me, and soon after, Sylvie drafted the divorce papers. I sent Richard the agreement, and as he called, as expected, and his voice carried that same old sneer laced with mockery and contempt. "Really, Evelyn, after all these years, you still think that threats of divorce will make me come crawling? Wouldn't it be better to admit that you were mistaken? Who knows, maybe I'll come home if I'm feeling good." "Why, father, with this charade?" He had no idea that this time I was finished. The agreement was clear: the house stays with me, I'll pack your things and come get them when you want, and if you have any problems with any terms, we can talk about them over the phone. I didn't waste any more words, I hung up. It was just another blunder that I would give into, like I always had, that a few scathing words would have me backing down, swallowing my pride, and falling back in line. I started packing his clothes, one piece at a time, because I couldn't stand the sound of his voice. As the room gradually cleared, a strange calm descended upon me. I had chosen everything in this house that belonged to him, and after 50 years of marriage, I discovered Something shocking, there wasn't much here that actually belonged to me. I had lived for Richard for decades. For my grandson Leo, I bought whatever Julian wanted without hesitation, but for myself, even getting a new dress felt like a guilty indulgence. Richard used to call me frugal, and Julian said I was tight-fisted. But neither of them ever understood. From now on, this house would gradually fill with items I picked out for myself, like the books I used to love but never purchased. The plush armchair I thought Richard would take at least a day to come get his belongings, but that very night the front door opened, and there he was, with his belongings packed neatly and waiting by the door. Something flickered across his face, and for the first time in decades, I saw genuine unease in his eyes. I imagined sitting in the clothes that made me feel beautiful, no more walking on eggshells, no more asking permission to live. "I'm not putting on a show, Richard," I said calmly, as if I were stating the weather. "I'm serious, this marriage is over," but his usual sarcasm quickly swallowed it. "Well, you're really putting on a show this time, I'll admit it almost feels real." I looked at the man I'd spent a lifetime with and felt nothing but stillness inside me. He never understood me more accurately, he never even tried. Ultimately, it's just jealousy, isn't it? Every time Celeste and I get close, you pull out. This divorce act, thinking I don't see through it, because we're too old for these games. You really think I'll keep putting up with this, so push me hard enough, and I'll give you exactly what you want. Finally, free to spend eternity with Celeste, no regrets left, right? I didn't argue. Instead, I just looked at him steadily and said, slow and firm, "Richard, I mean it, I want a divorce." His smile froze for the first time in years, and instead of making a snappy comeback, he simply stood there staring at me in silence, which told me everything I needed to know. "Let's see how you handle the rest of your life alone." He was still convinced that it was all a performance and that I was trying to manipulate him one last time. "Lastly," he said in a low, tight voice. "Men are always like this, they assume that a woman's decision to leave is caused by a little, unimportant thing. They never realize that a woman's heart doesn't die in a single moment, rather, it's buried under years of silent disappointment." I didn't want to explain any more, so I gave a calm response. "If that's what you want to believe," he said, his expression soured with frustration creeping into his voice. "Just a way to fulfill a dream for Celeste. Do you really need to be this petty? She and I have been friends for years, isn't that enough for you?" I nearly laughed every time I asked him about his relationship with Celeste, and he would always respond with the same just friends just excuse. Nothing happened, and whenever I let it go, as long as they hadn't crossed that last line, I would act as though I didn't see them. There was still something worth keeping, but I realized that I had been deceiving myself for too long and that continuing to act foolish would be complicit in the gradual destruction of my own life. I looked down for a moment, then looked up again, calm and clear. "Richard, emotional infidelity is still infidelity. Can you really say, even for a split second, that your heart ever truly belonged to me? You dropped everything to be by Celeste's side when she said one word these years, but what about me? Where were you when I needed you the most?" My voice slowed every sentence like a hammer, "And when our child had a fever, I carried him through the nighttime rain to his ear while you stayed with Celeste because she was afraid of thunder, and your mother was dying and waiting to see you." Richard was silent, his mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I looked at him, feeling no anger, no sorrow, just a strange stillness. "The last time I called you, you refused to answer because Celeste had just finalized her divorce and was feeling fragile. How many moments like that were there in 50 years? Can you even count them?" For the first time in my life, I felt solid underfoot, was able to breathe again, and even found the strength to say, quite gently, "If you and she still carry regrets, go be together while you're still alive." Everything I had been holding inside for years, bitterness, hurt, regret, was finally out in the open, and then it was gone. It was the first time in a long time that Richard truly looked at me, but instead of feeling anything, I just felt exhausted and resentful. Of course, there was resentment because our parents had arranged our marriage, so I had hoped I wasted another second staring at me as though he didn't recognize me. He watched me for a long time before letting out a faint, bitter laugh. "Evelyn, I never realized you've been holding so much in all these years." After all, Richard was regarded as a catch, a well-educated, polite, and respectable man. If it weren't for the matchmaking, I doubt I would have met him, but within a month of the wedding, I realized he would never have been mine. He had battled his entire family to marry Celeste, once went on a hunger strike, and threatened to sever his relationship with his parents, but they had refused to accept her, even threatening to do so. Richard gave up and married me instead of Celeste when she eventually married a wealthy businessman, not out of love but out of resignation. After learning all of this, I stepped up my efforts to be the ideal wife, taking care of the house, taking care of his parents, and doing everything right in the hopes that one day he would turn around and see me However, I finally realized that some men spend their entire lives chasing the ghost of what they never had, no matter how hard I tried. I said in a light, almost casual voice, I just want to move forward. Even if I only have one day left, I'm going to live it fully, let alone get divorced. Richard stood there, his expression tangled, as if my words had taken the wind out of him before he left that evening. I could never compete with a memory. I was done competing with that resentment, it's already in the past. He seemed to have run away, and I couldn't quite understand why. He had always wanted to be free to be with Celeste, so I had granted him that freedom. Shouldn't he have felt relieved? Instead, he vanished for days without any phone calls or visits and without mentioning the divorce at all. I wasn't in a rush, everything had already been revealed, and the rest was just a matter of time. In the last few days, I had already started living a sort of post-marriage life. My life was quiet but light and burden-free. I slept in every morning, drank my coffee slowly, took long walks, wandered through bookstores and weekend markets, and suddenly had time that was truly unstructured and beautiful. I no longer had to worry about household chores, take care of my husband, or watch the clock to make sure I got home in time for dinner. Sylvie Hartley, a young woman in her 20s, who had assisted in drafting my divorce papers, was everything. Her name suggested that she was gentle, sincere, and had sharp eyes. She invited me to a community pottery class, saying that clay had a way of calming the soul, and I joined out of curiosity and with little expectation, but to my surprise, I fell deeply in love with it. In just a few short classes, I had received more encouragement and recognition than I had in decades of birthdays, anniversaries, and Mother's Days combined. I felt as though I was being reborn, and Celeste looked amazed when she saw me again. The sensation of molding raw earth into a cup, bowl, or lampshade was unlike anything I'd experienced in my 70-plus years. The instructor praised my touch and said I had a natural sense for balance and form. I couldn't blame her because I used to always seem like a shadow next to her. She was perfectly manicured, dressed in tailored dresses, had flawless makeup, polished nails, and trendy colors. At 70, she looked barely older than me, and I wore loose, faded clothes with rough, calloused hands that were always half hidden in my sleeves. I didn't want to be seen around her, but now I stood tall, and too thought you'd be a mess these days. Celeste said, pretending to be casual, but the bitterness in her voice was impossible. I smiled at her without flinching or shrinking and let those time-worn hands show hands marked by decades of hard work that I no longer felt ashamed of. They were proof I'd lived, and they were my medals. She said, I heard you're going through another one of your divorce tantrums with Richard. He asked me to come and talk to you. She paused, then added, but honestly, what's there to explain? After all these years? Hasn't it been obvious who he really loves? I laughed softly, but it wasn't bad. She tilted her head and spoke in a condescending, syrupy voice. I don't understand what you're trying to accomplish with all of this after all these decades. Do you really think that a divorce will bring him back? It's a little depressing. Don't you think that even if you guilt him into coming home, it won't be love? You know that, don't you? I smiled calmly and sharply as glass, and you're right, I could never match your skill. 3 divorces and still managing to stay unforgettable. In a man's heart, that's an art I've never mastered. Her face faltered for a split second, but, like a badge, they thought their degrees gave them license to lecture, to belittle, and to assume they always knew better. Instead of flaunting yourself here, perhaps you should ask Richard to sign the divorce papers so that you can marry him and finally obtain the title you've been pursuing for years. Otherwise, when you two are buried next to each other, everyone will simply say that he buried his mistress in the family plot. What a tragic little irony. Don't you think that no amount of perfect makeup could hide the crack in her face? You're vulgar and uninformed, she yelled, getting to her feet and trembling with anger. You have no idea how much Richard and I love each other, you've never experienced true love in your life. The person who has never been loved is the true outsider. She started to run out the door, but she stopped dead in her tracks. Richard was standing there, his dark, unreadable eyes frozen, Celeste's body stiffening visibly. Her confidence vanished in an instant, and Richard's face was tight with rage. I asked him for assistance and to come explain things, but he said, that's how you chose to do it. I never imagined I'd live to witness the day Richard turned cold on Celeste, and she obviously didn't either. Her eyes were filled with disbelief, wounded pride, and desperation. Are you blaming Richard? She trembled and said, what am I to you? Her voice cracked with emotion, almost on the edge. What did I say that was so wrong all these years? You've never had the courage to admit that I'm the one you truly love. If she wants a divorce, then let her go. I don't understand what you're still hesitating about. Didn't you say your only regret in life was not being with me? She asked. Of tears, and Richard, the man who had once held her in high regard, softened his hand and instinctively reached for her, but when his eyes shifted to me, he stopped in mid-stride and said, "Celeste. You don't understand." He said in a low, pained voice that was intended to sound noble and conflicted, but to Richard, it was making me sick. I stood up and said, "Please spare me the sanctimonious guilt trip. You still don't get it, do you? You wanted everything? And in the end you'll be left with nothing. You say you don't want to let me down, but haven't you been letting me down one after another all along? You say you love Celeste, so how many opportunities have you had to leave me and spend decades with her?" Richard was never a man of principle, he was simply too scared to make a decision. Richard stood there in shock, staring at me as though I were someone he no longer recognized. He didn't say a word, "But you never did. You clung to us both because you were afraid to lose or too cowardly to make a decision. Now that we're all old, you're still hurting me and draining her. You don't realize how pitiful that is." One of them was an elderly man without courage, and the other was a woman who was still pursuing a dream. Suddenly, I felt nothing but a deep sense of clarity. I picked up my bag, turned around, and left that night when Richard called. His voice was low and tired, with a hint of something that might have been that he was ready to get a divorce. When I heard those words, I didn't feel sad. We signed the divorce papers the following day, and that one sheet of paper felt like a key that finally unlocked the cage I'd been in for the majority of my life. We filed at the courthouse that afternoon, but what I didn't anticipate was that the very next day, Richard and Celeste registered their marriage so quickly that it felt practiced, as if they'd Julian, who had been waiting backstage for the curtain to rise, sent me a video of a complete family dinner with glasses clinking and smiles all around. In the video, he raised his glass and called Celeste's mother, my grandson Leo, the boy I'd helped Ray, who smiled at her and chirped, "Pretty grandma." Julian then turned to face the camera and said, "This is what you wanted, right? Take a good look, Mom. Your husband, son, and grandson are all happy with someone else now." I didn't respond, but his childish attempt at a victory parade wasn't worth my time, and he must have thought I was feeling guilty because he then started sending me messages, videos, and pictures of I watched it all for a few days before I decided to stop wasting my energy and blocked him, deleted his number, and silenced his name, and then I just let him go. As far as I'm concerned, I never had a son. Celeste is helping Leo with his homework while laughing softly and reading by the window. He wrote so composedly, "Not like you always nagging." Life after divorce was more freeing and satisfying than I could have ever dreamed. I kept taking pottery classes and became more engrossed in the peaceful joy of molding clay. There was something sacred about the way your hands could create something out of nothing in total silence. It wasn't just art, it was therapeutic. Sylvie encouraged me to start recording my work. She assisted me in taking pictures and videos and even showed me how to set up a social media account and post content. I wasn't doing this for anyone else, but rather for myself. What I was documenting wasn't just pottery, it was transformation. And each piece I made represented a new step forward. For the first time in my life, I had ever committed to something solely for myself. At first, the comments on my pieces online were harsh. "You really have the audacity to post this. What a dull way to spend your life. Grandma, you look like you're glowing when you're working with clay." One day, as I was scrolling through the comments under a short video of me trimming the rim of a freshly thrown bowl, I noticed a familiar name, Richard. Gradually, the comment section started to change as my skills improved and my pieces became more refined. Some people said my cups had soul. I thought that would be the end of it, but that one comment unexpectedly sparked yet another war. Since marrying Richard, Celeste, she had developed a habit of checking his phone, and the moment she saw that comment he'd left on my video, she completely lost it. "Beautiful work, you look radiant when you're creating." I stared at it for a moment, then typed a simple reply, "Thank you." Celeste didn't buy it. She clung to her suspicions and insisted that he had been obsessively watching my videos, saying even the way you look at the screen is proof that he was emotionally cheating. Richard attempted to clarify that it was only a friendly compliment, and that we hadn't even seen each other in months. Their argument quickly became heated, and I never imagined that Celeste would storm into my pottery class at the community art center. We hadn't seen each other in months, but in that one moment, everything about us had changed. She appeared worn out, wearing a plain house sweater with no shape, her flawless makeup gone, her nail polish chipped, and her hands had rough calluses. Used to wear like armor had faded, and I was wearing a new, well-fitting dress. My skin was lighter from skin care, and my body was lighter from the gentle exercises Sylvia and I had started. However, more than anything else, what made a difference was the smile on my face, the calm, the ease, and my quiet confidence. Celeste stood there, frozen, observing me as if I were a stranger, so it's no surprise that Richard still thinks of you, she said. I turned to go, but she abruptly stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Evelyn, you're divorced. Can't you stop clinging to him? Her voice said, you look younger than you did before. I smiled lightly, saying nothing. I had heard rumors about their fights, but that was their drama, not mine. Did you need anything? I asked politely. If not, I have things to get back to. Had lost its typical grace and was now filled with resentment. He doesn't love you, all he feels for you is guilt and obligation. I'm the one he truly loves. It struck me as oddly tragic that a woman in her 70s would still talk about love and men as if they were the only money in the world. Celeste had spent her entire life pursuing love. I didn't take offense, I just replied coolly and politely, Celeste. I haven't seen Richard since the day we signed the divorce papers. There's no clinging, that's your imagination, she scoffed. So why are you posting those videos all the time that you don't know you want? She never stopped to consider who she truly was or who she could become. I know exactly what you're trying to do, but I felt exhausted all of a sudden. There's no point in arguing with someone who is adamant about believing their own fantasy, no explanation will ever reach them. I wasn't going to waste any more breath, but she wouldn't let it go. Her voice became sharper, her words became cruel. And she lashed out loud. You want him to regret losing you. Don't act like you're above it. We're both women. Her insults became more vile by the second until I silently reached for my phone and called Richard, who arrived shortly after, just in time to catch Celeste at the height of her tirade when I finally realized that what people call elegance means nothing if it has no foundation without character because it's just a well-tailored costume. He looked different from the man I used to iron shirts for every morning. He had a rumpled collar, a worn-out shirt, and a face that was etched with fatigue. He was a far cry from the dignified old-school professor. He saw me looking and tugged at his sleeve almost self-consciously, then turned to Celeste, his face dark, and said in a low, firm voice, that's enough, before turning to face me, Evelyn. She yelled, Shek, a divorced woman is still chasing after you. What, I can't call her out for it, and now you're defending her. Don't tell me you still have feelings for her. I'm sorry, she said softly, and that was Celeste's last blow. You're a spineless old flirt who always sways back and forth because you're defending her. They didn't even look back, so I assumed the curtain had finally fallen on this. Richard, who had spent his entire life meticulously maintaining his image, was humiliated. He had never been publicly reprimanded like this, and it wasn't like a child being dragged by the ear. He said nothing, just took her by the arm, red-faced and stiff, and hurried her out of the classroom like a man trying to escape a scene he never imagined himself in. Ridiculous little play, but a few days later, Julian called Mom and said, something's happened. Dad collapsed. The doctor says it's a stroke. He's in the intensive care unit right now. I paused for a moment before responding flatly, I hope he'll be okay. Julian wasn't happy with my response, and that's all you have to say. He spent 50 years of being with you, and now that he's ill, you don't even care, Julian. I asked him fairly, what would you like me to do? Should I go to the hospital and do CPR or SOB next to his bed to prove my loyalty? Let's face it, if I did become upset, wouldn't you be the first to accuse me of being unable to let go? Julian laughed sharply and bitterly and didn't even mention that a woman was worthless. Just weeks ago, when he was calling Celeste's mother to praise her as graceful and gentle, the epitome of elegance, she asked how the estate would be divided. I regret ever supporting their marriage because she hasn't prepared a proper meal in days, the house is a mess, and all she does is throw tantrums. But now that his comfort was in jeopardy, he threw her out without thinking twice, calling her that woman as if she were some disposable inconvenience. Although I had never liked Celeste, it was Julian that I pitied. He didn't understand that love was a transaction to him, affection was just another form of money, and I hung up without saying anything more. As for Richard, I had no plans to see him. That chapter had closed the day we signed those divorce papers. Whatever happened to Julian now belonged to a story I was no longer involved in, but he wasn't done because one morning, just as I was leaving for my pottery class, he appeared at my door with that awkward, practiced expression on his face, like a salesman about to make a pitch for a product he didn't fully believe in. He looked at me for a long time before saying, Mom, you look younger now, and I smiled a little. I suppose that's what happens when you leave the wrong person. His face briefly flashed with guilt or something similar, and then he said softly, Mom, you really won't go see Dad. He's in a serious condition, the doctors say he'll survive, but he may never walk again. That's unfortunate. I guess that means your burden will be a little heavier. Julian gave a strained laugh. Yeah, and that's sort of why I came, he said. I wanted to ask if you'd consider maybe coming back. I turned to face him, and his eyebrows went up. Are you out of your mind? Julian asked. Your father and I are divorced, he remarried. As he turned away, Celeste said, What exactly do you want me to come back for? Celeste filed for divorce the moment she learned that her father would be dead. demanding half of everything she owned. She was only ever after his money. I raised an eyebrow in silence, amused by the irony that soulmates and eternal love would be so oblivious to the inconvenience of illness and dependence in real life. I wasn't shocked when the romance ended sooner than planned, but I knew Julian hadn't come because he needed a caregiver or out of guilt or a change of heart. I looked at him coolly. So that's all? You came here to ask me to look after your father? And his face was slightly flushed from the lie. Then, in typical Julian fashion, he dropped the pretense. Margot and I both work, and since Leo is completely paralyzed, someone has to take care of him. We can't just abandon everything and stay in the hospital all the time, life must go on. Yes, there was Julie, and I knew the person who calculated affection like a ledger, weighing every emotion against cost and return. I laughed dryly. Have you ever heard of I actually laughed aloud this time because I had already sacrificed so much of my life for him, swallowed pride, endured humiliation. And now, after everything, he still saw me as a backup plan. Nurse, he sighed in frustration. How can we trust a stranger? Dad's used to you. You know his routine and how to manage him. No one else can do it like you, just help us out this once for Leo and me. I finally realized that no matter how much I gave him, I would always be merely a tool, an interchangeable part in the machinery of his life. I was done being that, Julian. Do you really think I owe everyone in this family my entire life? I've spent half of my years running this household, taking care of your father, raising you, and looking after Leo. Is still insufficient. You believe I should give up what little time I have left to live my own life, and you dare say things like, you think you still hold any weight in my heart? Since you aren't as important to me as the clay pot I just finished in my studio, please don't knock on my door again. I have a pottery competition to prepare for, so I don't have time to serve. After struggling for a moment to make a comeback, the washed-up old man Julian's face turned a stormy mix of red and pale, and his mouth twitched as if he couldn't decide whether to shout or walk away. Finally, he snapped, You're too old to be entering competitions. Why are you still wasting your time on all this nonsense? I was about to slap him at that moment, but before I could say anything, a sharp, clear voice interrupted me. Who established the rule that older women should spend the rest of their lives with their families? Sylvie entered the room with a self-assured smile. Evelyn is obviously talented and should compete. The real question is, though, why are you over 30 and still emotionally dependent on your mother, expecting her to clean up your mess? You could stand to learn something. I couldn't help but laugh as I gave her a grateful nod, the warmth rising in my chest, and Julian, humiliated and furious, slammed the door behind him as he stormed out. Two from her, at least she's living like a real person. She walked over and gently took my hand, saying, Don't listen to him. Do what you love, it's never too late to start. I felt calm for the first time in a long time, and I thought he had finally given up, but a few days later he sent Margot to my door. She smiled and asked how I was feeling, but she notably avoided the main reason she was there, not a word about Richard or taking care of Dad, as she watched me quietly shape clay at the wheel. Her expression softened. Glint of wistful admiration. Evelyn said softly, To be honest, Julian sent me here to try and convince you to come back, but looking at you now, if I actually said those words aloud, I'd feel like a complete yuck. Peaceful. Happy. I've never seen you like this before, not once in all those years in that house. You were always so tired, so heavy with everything you carried there. I didn't give it much thought at the time, but a few days later, Julian called again, his voice full of fury. His voice was warm, sincere, almost apologetic, and honestly, your courage to start over is inspiring. It's made me think about a lot of things. She gave me a soft nod as if she had made a decision quietly inside herself, then turned and left without saying anything else. Margot is now discussing divorce, and he blasted me for allegedly poisoning her mind by filling it with ideas and complaining that she isn't as obedient as she once was. The only thing he didn't do was examine himself, so I didn't bother answering. Instead, I let him vent because men like him don't care how many times you tell them the truth. The once proud-hearted household was reduced to two men, one paralyzed in bed and the other deeply selfish, when Celeste divorced Richard shortly after Margot and Julian finalized their divorce and she left with Leo without looking back. Later, Richard started sending people to me asking questions. The man lying before me was no longer the polished, eloquent professor I had once married. Instead, he was frail, his face sunken, his eyes dull, his body a hollow shell of who he used to be. He looked up at me, his voice weak but sincere, and I was surprised by how calm I felt when I finally said yes to seeing him. I thought I'd never see you again. Over the past few weeks, I've been reflecting on all the years we spent together, and I've finally come to the realization that I loved you. I was too self-centered to realize it, so I continued to hurt you. I didn't come here to ask for your forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it, but I didn't want to pass away without saying I'm sorry I listened. As dusk settled, Sillies knocked on the door and excitedly came in, holding a flyer with big news about the community pottery. I nodded politely, said a few kind, far-off words, and then turned and left that evening. I had brewed a pot of red tea, polished the small pieces of clay on my balcony until they gleamed, and lit a soft candle scented with sandalwood. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw that your vase had been chosen for the Excellence exhibition at the State Handcraft Festival. It seems like this elderly woman still has a few tricks up her sleeve. Sylvie smiled. No tricks, you're the coolest one in our whole group. I shook my head in amusement. The days went by slowly as I began instructing lessons, then turned to face the golden light streaming in through the window. While throwing, glazing, and trimming were being demonstrated at the event, young ladies would congregate around, hands covered in as I led them through the artwork. Clay listened, and occasionally I conducted little storytelling sessions to share life lessons. We called them Scratch, and I discussed starting again and making sacrifices for marriage. People claimed to adore the rediscovery and the way even the messiest clay could be transformed into something lovely. Sylvie advised that I start a podcast because the sound of my voice soothed them and made them feel seen. Your life is better than everything you say has weight, and I almost agreed with her about any drama series. I became a pottery podcast host without giving it much thought, and I talked about the years I've lost to courage, discovered the hands that molded not only clay but also resiliency. I discussed the heartbreak and the recovery that I talked about. How pottery showed me that even broken things might be rebuilt after silence and courage. I would place the freshly glazed cups from that day beside the window so that the light would capture their curves and shine on them during each recording. Edges were my memories, my stories, and my fresh start, which I no longer required. I stopped making room for compromise in order to gain anyone's acceptance, and I eventually realized who you lived for, even for a short time, isn't the most important thing in life. You lived for yourself, and now too am genuinely gorgeous and thoroughly alive.